Hi everybody, this is Bob Gilio. I thought I'd do a video for you this time that maybe people will appreciate because they've had experienced this problem as well. It involves furniture. So sometimes furniture, when it gets older, it has problems like in this case, this is a bench seat, and I'm doing it for my neighbor. And a very common problem with these bench seats or a lot of furniture is they use these studs to attach the leg to the actual bench. And what happens over time, they get loose and they eventually rip out if there's enough stress on them. So, and that's exactly what happened to this one. There's several of these legs that have ripped out. The studs, these metal studs, have ripped out not only out of the bench, the bottom of the bench itself, but also out of the leg. So you can't put back new ones or this one because the wood is now stripped out and it does not hold these studs anymore. So I'm going to show you this video how I would fix this this bench. You have one stud, a thread insert that still works fine. So this is the one that's fine. But for the other ones, found was that most of the studs that were used to anchor these legs to the actual bench were torn out or just about coming out. So here they are. I got them all out. What I decided to do was put in more heavy-duty studs like these, and also replace the sockets, the thread sockets, the metal thread sockets that these studs screw into, so you can still detach the legs if you want to. So what I did was I went ahead and I bored out new holes in all of the other sockets here. I used this jig I made to make sure that I got a nice straight drill angle when I did my boring. And I've done that already. See, I even notched it so I can get a nice square cut here. So now that I've done that, what I do is I took a dowel, a 3/4 inch dowel here, hardwood dowel that I had in my storeroom, and I'm going to use it. I cut a piece of it here, and I'm going to use it as to fill in the holes. I'm going to glue these in place. It's going to be a nice secure fit with the glue. Once the glue dries, I'm going to re-drill these to receive these threads here, and then I should be able to do the same for the legs. Here are the end of the legs, which is the same problems. I'm going to drill these deeper so I get much better gripping on the legs and get a very good strong connection. So let's get back to the bench sockets here that we started earlier. We bored these holes large, a 3/4 inch diameter. We inserted the hardwood dowels and glued them in place. So now they're ready to be bored out to the correct size. And to do that, I'm going to use the same jig that I used earlier to bore out the larger 3/4 inch diameter holes. And as you notice, I also used a piece of dowel here. I glued it in place into the jig. So we're going to go ahead and now drill the jig for the correct size, which happens to be a 3/8 inch diameter drill bit, and that would be the correct size for these threaded inserts that will then thread into these holes here when we use the same bit to drill right through these new hardwood dowels using the jig. Before we drill these holes, I'm going to just use a palm sander and smooth down these dowels so that they're flush with the surface of each of these pads. With the dowels sanded flush to the bench bottoms now, we're ready to go ahead and use our guide like we did before when we did drill the bigger holes for the dowels, the 3/4 inch holes. Now we're down to a 3/8 hole diameter. Here's the drill we're going to use. It's a brad point. As I said earlier, we like the brad points now because we have now a place for the brad point to pinch into and guide the whole length. So this will self-align once it finds that center point. And to make it easy, this jig I have here basically screws right through into this into the bench. You see these two holes here. These are the anchor holes for the screws that secures the jig to the bench and prevents it from moving during the drilling process. And with the hole now the same exact size as the bit, I basically have a nice alignment jig that will keep my drill nice and straight as I go down. And I put a depth collar on this to know when to stop drilling, which is basically the height of the thread insert. So we're going to just go ahead and drill the holes. Okay, so with the holes now drilled for the correct size of the threaded inserts, as you can see they came out nice and cleanly. To install the thread insert, I'm going to use this T-handle Allen wrench. It's a 6mm, I'm sorry, 8mm, and basically is a socket end here to the insert. You can see it here. It's a nice hex head on the inside. So we're going to just use that as a way to screw it in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to screw it in almost all the way. And then once I get to the last couple of threads, I'm going to use a little super glue. Because again, I wouldn't use wood glue because we're going from metal to wood. So that's a super glue job. I'm just going to touch a couple of the last threads with a little super glue just so that they never unscrew. It's really not for strength and holding it in the socket. It's just so it won't unscrew in the case that if anybody's unscrewing a leg, then it could cause this thread to unthread instead of the stud itself, the mechanical stud on the 5/16 thread. So we're just going to continue to tighten this until it's flush with the top of the base here, which is right there, and there we go. So when I went to the legs and started to assess the repair to these legs, I thought I could just drill them deeper since the new studs have a much longer thread depth than the old ones. Here is the old one here. So I thought that thread depth distance would be enough to get a good secure anchor of the stud into the legs. But some of these legs are really bad. They've been torn out, worn away, and you see that these studs will just fit right in here without grabbing any thread. So I'm going to lose all that strength. Even if I drill these deeper, I'm only going to be able to secure maybe the tip, maybe a half of the length of the threads into the leg securely, and that's not going to be strong enough in my view. So I did do one of the legs. It was tight enough to drill, and as you see, I did insert it. I drilled it deeper. And I inserted it. But for these other legs, they're just too far gone for that. So what I'm going to do, similar to the bench itself, I'm going to drill these holes out larger. And I'm going to use these 1/2-inch fluted hardwood dowels. Just like I did on the bench, I'm going to drill these holes larger. And I'm going to insert this dowel, glue it in place, let it set overnight, and then come back and re-drill the size of these holes to the proper size for the stud. So I get the whole length of the stud now securely threaded into the wood. Okay, so that presents another challenge that we have to deal with, because these legs are very long. And to try to drill these and get a nice square drilled hole into these is very difficult. So we need to use a creative solution here. And what I came up with was I made a jig that will be able to use to drill these in my drill press and keep it nice and square. And the jig looks like this. First of all, what I did was I removed the actual table from my drill press, which is this right here. It just comes right out. And I'm left with this nice opening here. That is large. But it's also convenient that it's square. It's perfectly square. This face is perfectly square to the drill bit, perpendicular. So I know that if I can get one of these legs in here and position it to hold it in place, then I'll get a very square drill bored hole when I do that. So how am I going to do that? Well, one of the things I came up with was this little jig. And so basically I insert the leg through the large opening, which is about 1.5 inches opening, and the leg is a little bit less than that. So at the largest diameter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this contour here in the design, the turning of the leg, and these mounting plates that I made, that I contoured just to the right diameter, that will basically hold the leg right at this neck portion. And I made these 2 plates here that will fit nice and securely around the leg like that. And I'm going to screw these in for each leg, and then that's going to give me my perfectly and very strong holder for these legs as I drill through the larger hole, and then I'm going to go with the smaller hole for the actual stud. So a couple of notes before we drill this leg. One is I'm going to use a traditional twist bit here as opposed to a Forstner bit or a brad point bit, because the hole has already been pre-drilled. So I have nothing to center the drill bit on. So this drill bit has a conical face to it, 118 degrees, and it will go ahead and find the center of the existing hole and use that as a reference as it drills down into the wood to continue drilling the hole larger. I couldn't do that with a Forstner bit or a brad point bit because they require the center point of the bit to actually go into fresh wood and to center the bit. So that's why I chose this bit here. It's a large bit, 1/2 inch diameter, so I turned down the speed to about 680 RPMs. And I set the depth gauge on the drill press so that the bit penetrates the wood 1.5 inches, which is the dimension of the length of these wooden dowels. So let's go ahead and drill. With the dowels now glued into place into the holes we drilled earlier, we are now ready to drill out the dowel now for the proper size of the stud we're going to use, which is right here. This metal stud, and the correct diameter is going to be 3/16 of an inch. We're going to do that, we need to just mark the center point of the leg, and to do that I used my machinist square here, the 45 end, to get me the center point, and then I went ahead and punched those with a punch, and I set up one of the legs here ready to go into the jig we discussed before, centered on the drill bit. Now this drill bit here is now I've switched to a brad point. This is a brad point bit because now I have material for the point to grab into and guide the drill bit down into the hole nice and straight. So I did this for the accuracy now, where before I didn't have a hole or material for the hole to find itself, but now we do. So I also increased the drill speed to 2,500 RPM because it is a smaller drill, and I set my depth gauge here, as you can see here, to 2 inches. So we're going to go ahead and drill out each of the dowels now. With the proper size holes now drilled into the legs, I now have mounted the leg into my vise using the pipe jaws wrapped with a piece of rubber so that I don't mar up the leg itself, but it's strong enough to hold it in place as I screw the studs in. And here is a stud here. And to screw the stud in, I'm going to use the two nut method. Uh, basically by tightening one nut against the other, that now has I lock the nuts onto the threaded portion of the stud, and this will allow me to use a T-handle socket to screw in the studs. And I'm going to use a little bit of screw wax to have it not have any excess friction, and have the stud go in smoothly. With all the studs installed into the legs and the thread inserts into the bench, we're now ready to screw the legs back onto the bench. I do want to mention to you, though, one important point about why these legs or these threads pull out over time. And that's because the legs loosen up. And when they're loose, their movement side to side causes a lot of stress on the thread inserts and the studs, and it causes them to be pulled out like we saw before. If the leg remains tight against the bench, then it's a very strong, secure connection, because now you have all of this surface from the top of the leg, the mating surface of the leg, onto this block here of the bench, and it's a very strong connection, which will last for years. But we have to prevent this leg from unscrewing or loosening and causing that situation to happen again. So to do that, what I like to do is use a little Loctite. So Loctite will hold the threads tight, hold this connection tight for many years, and prevent them from being loosened up. But also, you can actually unscrew them if you need to, applying extra force to them, so that you can remove the legs in the future. And here's the finished product. So it's all repaired, and it should be sturdy for a long time. And I hope this was helpful to you, and thanks for watching.